My name is Lydia, and I am 30 years old. Life was once sweet in the charming house my grandmother left me. My husband Jake and I were happy, or so I thought. His mother Margaret always viewed me with contempt, treating me like an intruder who stole her precious son. Little did I know that a simple lunch would turn into a nightmare when she demanded I give my beloved home to her friend. The sizzling oil that scarred my face that day marked the beginning of my fight back. If you are watching this, please let me know where you are from in the comments. Hit the like and subscribe buttons to follow my journey of healing and standing up for myself. Growing up in a small Midwest town taught me the value of hard work and simple pleasures. My parents raised me to be honest and kind, values I carried into adulthood as I worked my way through college with part-time jobs. I never expected to fall for someone like Jake Hartwell, whose family name was plastered across half the buildings in our city. We met at a charity fundraiser where I was serving drinks to earn extra cash for textbooks. Jake stood out from the crowd of wealthy patrons, not just because of his striking blue eyes that crinkled when he smiled, but because he actually thanked me when I handed him his drink. That small courtesy in a sea of demanding rich folks caught my attention. After the event, Jake lingered behind and asked for my number. I hesitated at first. Guys like him usually wanted just one thing from girls like me, but something in his genuine smile made me take a chance. Our first date was at a small diner rather than some fancy restaurant, and I appreciated that he did not try to flaunt his wealth. The bubble burst when I met his mother, Margaret Hartwell. The moment I walked into their mansion for Sunday dinner, she looked at me like I was something stuck to her designer shoe. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back so tightly it gave her a permanent look of displeasure, which deepened the second Jake introduced me. "This is your friend," she had asked the pause before friend, making it clear she thought I was temporary. Jake squeezed my hand. "Mom, this is Lydia, my girlfriend." "How interesting," Margaret said, examining my department store dress. "And what does your father do, Lydia?" "He works at the paper mill," I answered proudly. My dad had supported our family with that job for 20 years. Margaret's thin smile did not reach her eyes. "How quaint." That first dinner set the tone for our entire relationship. Every interaction with Margaret was an exercise in restraint, as she made backhanded compliments about my simple upbringing or wondered aloud if my clothes came from one of those discount places. Despite Margaret's clear disapproval, Jake proposed 6 months later. I said yes because I loved him, and foolishly believed love would be enough to overcome his mother's influence. The engagement ring was enormous. Margaret had insisted Jake use the family heirloom, and felt heavy on my finger, almost like a shackle rather than a symbol of love. Our wedding planning turned into a battleground. Margaret insisted on controlling every detail, from the venue, their country club, to the guest list, mostly her friends and business associates. I wanted a simple ceremony in my hometown church, but Jake convinced me to compromise. "It will make things easier," he said, a phrase I would hear countless times in our marriage. The wedding day itself was a blur of Margaret correcting my posture, adjusting my veil, and telling relatives loudly how she hoped the marriage would work out despite the differences. Jake remained cheerfully oblivious, or perhaps willfully blind to his mother's behaviour. The one bright spot came a week after our honeymoon, when my grandmother called with news that changed everything. My sweet, soft-spoken grandma, who had raised me after my mother passed, had decided to move to a retirement community in Arizona. "The house is yours now, Lydia," she told me, her voice cracking with emotion. "Your grandfather built it for our family. It should stay with someone who loves it." The house was a beautiful Victorian in a historic neighborhood downtown. Not massive like the Hartwell estate, but charming and filled with character. Hardwood floors worn smooth by generations, stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the walls, in the afternoon sun, a wraparound porch perfect for summer evenings. Most importantly, it was filled with memories of happy family gatherings and unconditional love. When I suggested to Jake that we make it our home, he surprisingly agreed. "It would be nice to have something that is just ours," he said. And for once, I saw him stand a little taller away from his mother's shadow. Margaret was livid when we told her. Her face flushed crimson as she spluttered, "But I already told the realtor you would take the Westlake property. I had the interior designer draw up plans." Jake for once did not immediately give in. "Mum, Lydia loves this house. It has sentimental value." "Sentimental value," she scoffed. "What about family loyalty? That shabby old place probably needs a complete renovation. The neighborhood is hardly suitable." Despite her protests, we moved in and spent our first year making the house our own. I planted a garden in the backyard, while Jake restored the original woodwork. For brief shining moments, we were happy and independent. Yet Margaret found ways to insert herself into our lives. She would drop by unannounced with essential kitchen gadgets I simply must have. She would call Jake at all hours with emergencies that required his immediate attention. Slowly, I watched my husband revert to the pattern established since childhood, appeasing his mother at all costs. Jake began to straddle an impossible line between wife and mother. When Margaret criticized my cooking, he would say, "Mom means well, Lydia." When she rearranged our furniture during a visit, claiming my arrangement blocked the energy flow, he would shrug and say, "Does it really matter? It makes her happy." I tried to maintain peace for Jake's sake. I smiled through Margaret's intrusive questions about when we would start a family. I ignored her comments about how the house was adequate for now, but we would obviously need to upgrade once Jake's career advances. I bit my tongue when she gave me cleaning supplies as birthday gifts because the house needed a woman's touch. And all the while I held on to the dream that one day Jake would see his mother for what she was, manipulative and controlling. I was wrong. The roots of her influence ran far deeper than I ever imagined, and our home would become the battleground for a war I never saw coming. The first major red flag appeared on our first anniversary. Jake and I had planned a quiet dinner at home. I had spent the entire day preparing his favorite meal and setting up a romantic evening. Just as I lit the candles, the doorbell rang. There stood Margaret, dressed for dinner and carrying a bottle of champagne. "Surprise," she announced, pushing past me into the foyer. "I thought we should celebrate as a family." Jake's face registered shock briefly before settling into a resigned smile. "Mum, we actually had plans." "Nonsense." Margaret waved away his protest. "I brought your favourite champagne, the one we drank at your graduation. Much better than whatever you have here." That night set a pattern. Margaret began appearing more frequently, always with some excuse. She needed Jake's help with her computer. She was just in the neighbourhood and thought she would check on us. She brought household items I needed, and new curtains because mine were adding fun, kitchen appliances because mine were outdated, decorative items because the house looked too plain. Each visit included subtle critiques of how I maintained the house. She would run her finger along shelves checking for dust, rearrange the books on our coffee table, or comment on water spots on the glassware. "A proper homemaker takes pride in these details, Lydia," she would say with a tight smile. Jake's responses to these intrusions grew increasingly passive. Initially, he would apologize to me after she left. "Mom is just set in her ways," he would say. "She means well." But gradually, he stopped acknowledging the problem at all, treating her constant presence as normal. Our arguments about Margaret became more frequent, always ending the same way, with Jake accusing me of overreacting. "She's my mother, Lydia. What do you expect me to do?" The question hung between us, unanswered, creating a widening gulf in our marriage. 4 months after our anniversary, Margaret brought Susan Williams to our home for the first time. Susan was a recent divorcee, and Margaret's bridge partner, a woman with a permanent expression of entitlement etched into her features. Susan's husband ran off with his secretary, Margaret explained, settling into my favourite armchair without asking. "Just dreadful. Left her with almost nothing after 20 years of marriage." Susan dabbed at perfectly dry eyes. "The settlement barely covered my basics. I have to sell the house. The memories are too painful anyway." "Such a shame," Margaret said, patting Susan's hand. "If only there were nice, affordable properties in this neighbourhood." "Susan loves this area, don't you, dear?" Susan nodded, her eyes scanning our living room with an appraising look. "Such a charming home. So much potential." That first visit was followed by many others. Susan became Margaret's constant companion during her impromptu visits. While Margaret criticised my housekeeping, Susan would wander through rooms, opening closets, and commenting on the quaint original features of the house. One afternoon, I came home early from work with a migraine to find Margaret and Susan in my kitchen, measuring the counter space and cabinets. They jumped when I entered, exchanging guilty glances. "Just getting ideas for Susan's next place," Margaret explained briskly. "She needs to know what will fit." Later that week, I overheard them in the garden when they thought I was upstairs. "The place needs work," Susan was saying, "but the bones are good, and the location is perfect for my new job. Trust me." Margaret replied, her voice low but clear. "Jake sees reason where that girl does not. We just need to be patient." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Were they actually planning to take my house? It seemed too outlandish to be true, but the seed of suspicion was planted. Around the same time, Jake became increasingly secretive about our finances. He changed the password on our joint bank account and brushed off my questions about missing money. "Just work expenses," he would mutter, turning away from me. "Nothing to worry about." But there was plenty to worry about. Bills that should have been paid were generating late notices. Jake began working later hours, coming home with alcohol on his breath. When I found a casino receipt in his jacket pocket, he exploded in anger. "Are you spying on me now? Going through my things? God, Lydia, give me some space." The man who had once looked at me with such love was becoming a stranger, distant and defensive. And always in the background was Margaret whispering in his ear during their frequent lunches and phone calls. One night after Jake fell asleep, his phone buzzed with a text. I had never snooped before, but desperation pushed me past that boundary. The message was from Margaret. "Remember our deal. Handle your wife, secure the house, and your debts are gone. Love you, son." In that moment, the pieces clicked into place. Jake's financial troubles, Margaret's sudden interest in helping Susan find housing, the increasing pressure on me to renovate or consider selling. It was all connected. My house had become their target, and my husband was complicit in the plot. The tension in our home became almost unbearable as Margaret escalated her campaign. She no longer bothered with the pretense of politeness, openly criticizing everything from my cooking to my career choices. A real wife would be focused on creating a proper home for Jake, not working that little job, she sniffed during Sunday dinner. Jake, who once at least attempted to defend me, now sat in uncomfortable silence, or worse, nodded in agreement. "Mom just thinks you could be happier focusing on our home," he offered weakly when I confronted him later. "Our home? You mean the one your mother and Susan are planning to take?" I snapped back. His face flushed. "That's ridiculous. You're being paranoid." But I wasn't paranoid. Margaret and Susan had become bolder, discussing renovation plans right in front of me. "This wall should come down," Susan would say, gesturing at my living room. "Create an open concept." "Absolutely," Margaret would agree. And those old-fashioned cabinets in the kitchen, they would need to be replaced with something more modern. Jake watched these exchanges with a strange, guilty expression, but said nothing to stop them. It was as if he was already mentally preparing for me to be gone from the equation. The final straw came when I returned home early one day to find Jake, Margaret, and a man in a suit walking through the house. They froze when they saw me, Jake's face draining of colour. "Lydia, you're home early, bon," he stammered. The man in the suit extended his hand. "Richard Brennan, Lakeside Realty, just doing a preliminary assessment of the property." I stared at Jake in disbelief. "You brought a realtor to our house without telling me." Margaret stepped forward, her voice smooth as silk. "Jake was just exploring options, Lydia. Property values in this neighbourhood have increased dramatically. It would be foolish not to consider selling." "This house isn't for sale," I said firmly, my voice shaking with anger. "And it never will be. Please leave." After the realtor left Jake, and I had the worst fight of our marriage. He finally admitted to gambling debts, thousands of dollars he had lost playing poker and betting on sports. "Mum offered to help," he said, his voice small. "She said she would cover everything if we sold the house and moved into the apartment above her garage until we get back on our feet." "And Susan?" I asked coldly. "Where does she fit into this plan?" Jake couldn't meet my eyes. "Mum thinks she deserves a fresh start. The house would be perfect for her." "My grandmother's house, the one she left to me, that's not your decision to make." Jake ran his hands through his hair in frustration. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under. Mum controls the family money. If she decides to cut me off..." "Then what, Jake? You might have to stand on your own 2 feet for once in your life." The hurt in his eyes almost made me regret the words, but I couldn't back down. This house was my heritage, my sanctuary. I would not give it up, especially not to Susan Williams. In the following days, small things began to happen around the house. My grandmother's antique vase mysteriously fell and shattered. The water heater suddenly stopped working. My jewelry box was ransacked, several pieces missing. When I reported the missing jewelry to Jake, he accused me of being careless. "You probably misplaced them. You've been so stressed lately, acting irrationally." I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Was I overreacting? Was I really as unstable as Jake and Margaret suggested? But then I would look at the walls of the home my grandfather built, remember my grandmother's face when she handed me the keys, and find my resolve again. Then came Margaret's invitation, a peace offering she called it. A family lunch at our house, just the four of us, Jake, me, Margaret, and Susan. To clear the air, Margaret insisted. We've all been under such strain. Jake pressed me to agree. Please, Lydia, just one lunch, for me. Against my better judgment, I said yes. Perhaps naively, I hoped we might actually find a resolution that Margaret might finally see how important this house was to me. I was wrong. So terribly wrong. The morning of the lunch arrived with an ominous feeling in the air. Dark clouds gathered outside, matching my mood as I reluctantly prepared for our guests. I had barely slept the night before, my mind racing with anxiety about what Margaret might say or do. Margaret arrived 30 minutes early, Susan trailing behind her like a shadow. Without asking permission, Margaret headed straight for my kitchen, setting down grocery bags on the counter. I brought proper ingredients, she announced, examining my kitchen with a critical eye. I couldn't trust what you might have on hand. I bit back a retort as she began unpacking specialty olive oil, imported pasta, and expensive vegetables. Susan wandered through the house, running her fingers along the furniture and peering into rooms as if making a mental inventory. Can I help with anything? I asked Margaret stiffly, trying to maintain some control in my own kitchen. She waved me away. I know how to prepare a proper Italian meal, Lydia. Why don't you make yourself useful and set the table? Try to use matching plates if you have them. I clenched my fists, but complied, arranging my grandmother's china on the dining table. As I placed the silverware, I could hear Margaret and Susan whispering in the kitchen, their conversation punctuated by muffled laughter that set my teeth on edge. Jake was supposed to be home by noon, but 12:30 came and went with no sign of him. Margaret glanced at her watch repeatedly, her mouth tightening with annoyance. The smell of garlic and olive oil filled the house as she aggressively stirred a sauce on the stove. Where is he? She muttered. Always late, just like his father. At 12:45, Jake finally burst through the door, his tie askew and his face flushed. Sorry, he said breathlessly. Meeting ran long. Margaret immediately softened. There's my boy, just in time. I made your favourite, penne arrabbiata, with my special sauce. Jake kissed his mother's cheek, then gave me a quick, perfunctory peck that felt like an afterthought. Smells amazing, Mom. Thanks for doing this. Someone needs to make sure you eat properly, Margaret said with a pointed look in my direction. We gathered around the table in awkward quartet. Margaret served the food with flourish, making a show of giving Jake the largest portion. You need to keep your strength up, she said, her voice honey-sweet. The first few minutes of lunch passed in tense silence, broken only by Margaret's effusive praise of her own cooking. The secret is using authentic Italian olive oil, she explained to no one in particular. Not the cheap stuff from the supermarket. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite gone. Susan ate delicately, all the while scanning the dining room as if mentally measuring for drapes. Jake kept his eyes down, shoveling pasta into his mouth with mechanical precision. Finally, Margaret set down her fork and cleared her throat. Well, since we're all here, I think it's time we discuss the elephant in the room. Jake tensed beside me. Susan straightened in her chair, suddenly alert. This house, Margaret continued, gesturing around with her manicured hand. It's becoming quite the source of conflict, isn't it? And for what? An outdated structure that needs more work than it's worth. My grandmother left this house to me, I said quietly. It has sentimental value. Margaret dismissed this with a wave. Sentimentality doesn't pay bills, dear, or gambling debts. She gave Jake a meaningful look. I turned to my husband. You told her. Jake at least had the decency to look ashamed. Mom and I discussed our financial situation. She wants to help. Yes, Margaret interjected smoothly. And I have the perfect solution. Susan has made a very generous offer for this property, well above market value. You and Jake can use the money to clear his debts and make a fresh start. Perhaps in that lovely apartment complex near my home. Susan nodded eagerly. I've already sold my house. The closing is next week. I could move in here by the end of the month. I stared at them in disbelief. You've already planned all this. Without even consulting me. We're consulting you now, Lydia, Margaret said with exaggerated patience. And really, it's the sensible choice. Jake's financial troubles won't disappear on their own. This house is not for sale, I said firmly. Not to Susan, not to anyone. Margaret's face hardened. Don't be selfish, Lydia. Think about Jake's future. I am thinking about our future, I countered. This is our home. A home that's straining your marriage, Margaret snapped. Jake deserves better than a wife who puts a pile of old wood and plaster above his needs. I looked at Jake, silently pleading for his support. He stared at his plate, his face a mask of discomfort. "Jake," Margaret prompted, "tell your wife what you told me yesterday." Jake cleared his throat, still not meeting my eyes. "Mom thinks... I think it might be best if we consider Susan's offer. Just consider it." My heart sank like a stone. "You want to sell our home, the one place that's truly ours?" "It's just a house, Lydia," he muttered. "We can find another one." "It's not just a house." I felt tears threatening, but forced them back. "It's my heritage, my grandmother's gift to me. How can you even consider this?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Because he's in debt up to his eyeballs thanks to your inability to manage a household budget. Because his mother is offering a way out of the mess you two have created." "The mess he created," I corrected, anger rising. "I'm not the one gambling away our savings." Jake finally looked up, his expression hardening. "No, you're just the one refusing to help fix the problem. By giving away my grandmother's house, that's your solution." Margaret slammed her hand on the table, making the china rattle. "Enough. I've had it with your stubbornness. Susan needs this house. She has a job starting next month in the city, and this location is perfect for her commute." "That's not my problem," I said coldly. "Find another house." "There are no other houses available in this neighborhood right now," Susan piped up, her voice whining. "I've looked everywhere." "Again, not my problem," I repeated. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. Her face was flushed with fury as she leaned across the table toward me. "You ungrateful little witch, after everything I've done for you." "What exactly have you done for me?" "Margaret? Criticize my housekeeping, undermine my marriage, try to steal my home." "I've tolerated you," she spat. "I've watched my son throw away his potential on a gold-digging nobody from the wrong side of town." Jake half rose from his seat. "Mom, that's enough." But Margaret was beyond reason, now her face contorted with rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Using this house to trap my son. Well, it won't work. You'll give Susan this house, or I swear to God your marriage is over. Jake knows where his loyalties should lie." I stood my ground, though my heart was racing. "This house is not for sale. Not now, not ever. I suggest you both leave." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Margaret's eyes darted to the stove where the pan of oil she had used for cooking still sat cooling. In one fluid movement, she grabbed the handle, pivoted, and flung the contents directly at my face. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, hot oil splattering across my cheek, jaw, and neck. I screamed, stumbling backward as the burning sensation intensified. Through the haze of pain, I saw Susan's shocked expression, heard her gasp of horror. But it was Jake's reaction that truly broke me. He stood frozen, saying nothing, doing nothing. The corner of his mouth even twitched upward briefly, almost a nervous laugh, before he seemed to realize the severity of what had happened. "You witch!" Margaret screamed, still clutching the empty pan. "You'd better give me this house or your marriage is over." Somehow, through the searing pain, I managed to make it to the bathroom, where I immediately ran cold water and began cooling my burning skin. The mirror revealed angry red splotches spreading across the left side of my face. I could hear raised voices from the dining room, Susan urging them to call an ambulance, Margaret hissing at her to be quiet, Jake's muffled responses. A strange calm descended over me as I gently patted my face dry with a clean towel. The physical pain was excruciating, but it had crystallized something in my mind. This was the breaking point. There would be no coming back from this. I returned to the dining room, my face partially wrapped in a damp towel. Margaret stood with her arms crossed, unrepentant. Susan hovered by the door, clearly wanting to escape. Jake paced nervously between them. "Lydia," he began, his voice shaking. "Mom didn't mean get out," I said quietly, looking directly at Margaret and Susan. "Get out of my house now." "You need medical attention," Susan said weakly. "What I need is for you to leave." Margaret grabbed her purse, her chin raised defiantly. "This isn't over. Come, Jake. We're leaving." To my bitter disappointment, but not to my surprise, Jake hesitated, then moved to follow his mother. At the doorway, he paused, looking back at me with confused regret. "Lydia, please." "You'll regret this," I told them, my voice steady despite the throbbing pain. "All of you. I promise you that." As the door closed behind them, I sank into a chair, my body shaking with delayed shock. But beneath the pain and betrayal, a new emotion was taking root: determination. Margaret was right about one thing: this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. but the ending would be very different from what she imagined. After they left, I sat alone at the dining table for what felt like hours, my mind racing, despite the pain radiating from my face. The house that had once been my sanctuary now felt tainted by Margaret's violence and Jake's betrayal. Yet I refused to cry. Tears would only aggravate my burns. Instead, I carefully documented my injuries, using my phone to take photos of the angry red blisters forming across my cheek and neck. I recorded a video explaining what had happened while the events were fresh in my mind. Something told me I might need this evidence later. I should have gone to the hospital, but fear held me back. What if Margaret got to Jake first? What if they twisted the story claimed I had attacked her? The Hartwells had influence in this town. Would anyone believe my version of events over theirs? So I treated my burns as best I could with aloe vera gel from my first aid kit and over-the-counter pain medication. The physical pain was nothing compared to the ache in my heart as I replayed Jake's reaction, or rather his lack of reaction, in my mind. The man who had vowed to love and protect me had stood by while his mother assaulted me. Jake returned home just after midnight, reeking of whiskey. He stumbled into our bedroom, where I lay awake, unable to sleep on my injured side. "Lydia," he slurred, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. "We need to talk." "Now you want to talk." I kept my voice low, controlled. "After you let your mother throw hot oil in my face and then left with her." He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I had once found endearing. Now it just seemed weak. "Mum feels terrible about what happened. She was just upset." Upset. I sat up slowly, wincing at the movement. She committed assault, Jake. She could go to jail. His eyes widened in alarm. "You wouldn't press charges against my mother." It wasn't a question, but a command, and something inside me hardened further. "Why not give me one good reason?" "Because she's family." His voice rose in frustration. "Look, she made a mistake. She lost her temper, but going to the police would just make everything worse." "Worse than this." I gestured to my bandaged face. Jake looked away, unable to meet my eyes. "She wants to apologize. She suggested we all meet tomorrow to talk it through. Susan's bringing her lawyer friend to help us reach a compromise about the house." I stared at him in disbelief. "A compromise? After what she did to me?" "It was an accident, Lydia," Jake insisted, his voice desperate. "Can't you see that dragging this out only hurts everyone? If we just agree to sell the house, all of this can go away." In that moment, I saw Jake clearly, for perhaps the first time. Not the charming man I had fallen in love with, but a coward controlled by his mother's purse strings, willing to sacrifice anything, including me, to maintain his comfortable lifestyle. "Get out of this room," I said quietly. "You can sleep on the couch." "This is my house too," he protested. "Is it? You seem pretty eager to sell it to Susan." Jake stormed out, slamming the door behind him. I lay awake until dawn, formulating a plan. I had been naive, trusting, willing to compromise, but no more. The time for appeasement was over. The next morning, I called in sick to work, then contacted my closest friend Amy, asking if she could come over. Amy had never liked Margaret, seeing through her polite facade from the start. When she arrived and saw my face, her expression morphed from concern to fury. "Who did this to you?" she demanded. I told her everything. The gambling debts, the scheme to take my house, Margaret's assault, Jake's betrayal. Amy, a paralegal at a local law firm, listened intently, occasionally taking notes. "This is serious, Lydia. You need medical documentation of your injuries and a police report." "What if they don't believe me?" I asked, voicing my deepest fear. "The Hartwells know everyone in this town." "Not everyone," Amy said firmly. "And they don't know the police chief's daughter, which I happen to be. We're going to the station right now." Before we could leave, the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw Margaret, Susan, Jake, and a man in a suit, presumably Susan's lawyer friend. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door but blocked their entry. Margaret looked perfectly composed, not a hair out of place, as if she hadn't committed assault less than 24 hours ago. "Lydia, we need to talk, like adults." I noticed her eyes widen slightly at the sight of my bandaged face, but she quickly masked her reaction. Jake stood behind her, looking miserable, but saying nothing. "I have nothing to say to any of you," I replied coldly. The man in the suit stepped forward, extending his hand. "Robert Kingsley, attorney at law. I believe we can resolve this unfortunate situation without further unpleasantness." I didn't take his hand. The unfortunate situation being assault and attempted theft of my property. Margaret's smile tightened. "Accidents happen in heated moments, Lydia. No one needs to overreact. I have a simple solution, Kingsley continued smoothly. Mrs. Williams is prepared to make a very generous offer for this property, 20% above market value. Everyone walks away happy. I'm not interested, I said firmly. Jake finally spoke up. Lydia, please. Just look at the papers. For me. I looked at my husband, the stranger who had once vowed to cherish me, and felt nothing but pity. No, Jake. Not for you, not for anyone. This house is mine, and it's not for sale. Margaret's facade cracked. You stubborn little... Mom, Jake warned, glancing nervously at the lawyer. I think you should all leave. I said, Amy's solid presence behind me giving me strength. And Jake, you should take your things. I don't want you here anymore. Jake's face flushed with anger. You can't kick me out of my own house. Watch me, I replied, pulling out my phone. Leave, or I call the police and report the assault right now. I have the photos and a witness. They left Jake throwing one last betrayed look over his shoulder as Margaret hustled him to her car. The moment they were gone, I sagged against Amy, the adrenaline draining away. You did good, she said, squeezing my shoulders gently. But this is just the beginning. We need to document everything and get you proper legal representation. Someone not afraid to go against the Hartwells. That afternoon, with Amy by my side, I finally sought medical treatment for my burns, filed a police report against Margaret, and scheduled a consultation with a divorce attorney. As I signed the preliminary paperwork, a strange sense of calm settled over me. The path ahead would be difficult, but for the first time since Margaret had entered my life, I felt in control. That evening, alone in my grandmother's house, I walked through each room, reconnecting with the space that was rightfully mine. In the home office, I noticed something I had overlooked before. The small security camera my grandfather had installed years ago to monitor his antique collection. It was discreet, tucked in the corner of the ceiling, with a perfect view of the dining room. With trembling fingers, I checked if it was still functional. The little green light blinked steadily. I connected it to my computer and scrolled through the footage, my heart racing as I found the previous day's recording. There, in high definition, was Margaret throwing the hot oil at my face. There was Susan gasping in shock. And there was Jake doing nothing, the corner of his mouth twitching upward before he schooled his expression. I saved the footage to multiple devices, then sent a copy to Amy for safekeeping. This was the evidence that would ensure justice. Margaret had underestimated me for the last time. The next few weeks unfolded like scenes from a movie I never wanted to star in. The burns on my face slowly began to heal, leaving behind reddened patches that the doctor assured me would fade with time and proper treatment. The emotional wounds, however, ran deeper. Jake made several attempts to contact me, alternating between apologies and accusations. You're overreacting, he texted one day. Mom made a mistake. The next message would be pleading, please, Lydia, let's talk this through. I miss you. I saved every message but responded to none. Meanwhile, I focused on building my case. The attorney Amy recommended, Diana Patel, specialized in domestic violence and family law. She wasn't intimidated by the Hartwell name or their connections. The video evidence is compelling, Diana told me during our second meeting. Combined with your medical records and police report, we have a strong case against Margaret for assault and battery. As for the divorce, she laid out my options clearly. Since the house was inherited and not marital property, Jake had no legal claim to it. His gambling had depleted our joint savings, but Diana believed we could argue for compensation in the settlement. What about Margaret? I asked. Will she face criminal charges? Diana nodded grimly. The district attorney is reviewing the case. With the video evidence, it's likely they'll proceed with charges. True to Diana's prediction, Margaret was arrested the following week. The local newspaper ran a small article about the incident, carefully worded but damaging nonetheless. Prominent socialite arrested for alleged assault was not the kind of publicity the Hartwell family was accustomed to. The arrest seemed to break something in Jake. He showed up at the house unannounced, pounding on the door until I reluctantly answered. They arrested my mother, he said, his voice hollow. She's devastated. Her reputation is the least of her concerns, I finished coldly. She should be worried about jail time. Jake's expression hardened. You could drop the charges. We could work this out as a family. We're not family anymore, Jake. Your mother made sure of that the moment she attacked me, and you sealed it when you did nothing to help. I was in shock, he protested. You can't hold that against me. I stepped back from the door. I'm holding everything against you. The lies, the gambling, the betrayal. Please leave and don't come back without your lawyer present. As I closed the door on his stunned face, a text message arrived from an unfamiliar number. This isn't over. The Hartwells don't lose. I showed it to Diana, who immediately filed for a restraining order against both Margaret and Jake. The legal proceedings moved forward with excruciating slowness. Margaret hired the most expensive defense attorney in the state, who attempted to portray the incident as a regrettable accident during a family disagreement. When that strategy faltered in the face of the video evidence, they pivoted to questioning my character, suggesting I had provoked Margaret and manipulated the situation. Through it all, I maintained my resolve. Each court appearance, each deposition, each hostile question from Margaret's attorney, I faced them all with the quiet strength I had discovered within myself. No more appeasing, no more compromising my dignity for the sake of peace. The turning point came from an unexpected source. 3 months into the proceedings, I received a call from Diana. "Someone wants to meet with you," she said cryptically. "I think you should hear what he has to say." The following day, I sat across from Harold Hartwell, Jake's father, who had divorced Margaret years ago and largely stayed out of the public eye. A distinguished man with silver hair and Jake's blue eyes, he carried himself with a quiet dignity Margaret had always lacked. "I saw the video," he said without preamble. "The police showed it to me when they were gathering evidence against Margaret." I waited, unsure where this was headed. "I'm not surprised," he continued, his voice heavy with resignation. "Margaret has always been volatile, controlling. It's why our marriage ended. I couldn't protect Jake from her influence then, and I regret that every day." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked carefully. Harold met my eyes directly. "Because I want to help you. Margaret needs to face consequences for her actions, and Jake needs to stand on his own 2 feet for once in his life. I'm willing to testify about Margaret's history of manipulative and aggressive behaviour." His testimony proved decisive. Faced with mounting evidence and Harold's damning account of her past behaviour, Margaret agreed to a plea deal. Assault charges in exchange for a suspended sentence, anger management classes, community service, and most importantly, a permanent restraining order keeping her away from me and my property. The divorce proceedings were equally transformative. Jake, finally recognising the severity of the situation, stopped contesting the divorce. In our final courtroom encounter, he looked defeated, the golden boy facade crumbling to reveal the weak man beneath. "I'm sorry," he said quietly as we waited for the judge. "I should have protected you." "Yes," I agreed simply. "You should have." The divorce was finalised with terms favourable to me. I kept my grandmother's house free and clear, and Jake was ordered to repay his gambling debts from his share of their joint assets. Margaret? Her social standing, severely damaged by the criminal case, retreated to her estate, her bridge club friends suddenly finding reasons to be unavailable. As for Susan, she quietly purchased a condominium across town, far from my neighbourhood. I occasionally saw her at the grocery store, where she would quickly turn down another aisle to avoid meeting my eyes. In the aftermath, I found myself the unexpected owner of something precious that had nothing to do with property, my complete independence. The house that had been the centre of so much conflict became truly mine, not just legally, but emotionally. Every room held my grandmother's memory, not the toxic presence of Margaret or Jake. A year passed then too. The physical scars from Margaret's attack faded to faint pink marks that were barely noticeable unless I pointed them out. The emotional healing took longer, but gradually I reclaimed my life and my identity. The first major decision I made after the divorce was to renovate the sunroom at the back of the house into a small cafe. My grandmother had always dreamed of running a neighbourhood coffee shop, and this felt like the perfect way to honour her memory. I used part of the divorce settlement to fund the renovation, transforming the space into a warm, inviting room with comfortable chairs and small tables. Cafe Serenity opened 6 months after my divorce was finalised. It was small, just big enough for a dozen customers, but it quickly became a gathering place for locals. I served homemade pastries along with specialty coffees and teas, creating the kind of welcoming atmosphere my grandmother had always fostered in her home. Running the cafe gave me purpose and connected me to the community in ways I had never expected. Regular customers became friends. I hired a local art student to manage the counter when I needed time off, and she brought in her own network of creative young people who filled the space with energy and ideas. Throughout this transformation, I also focused on my own healing. Weekly therapy sessions helped me process the trauma and betrayal I had experienced. I joined a support group for survivors of domestic violence, where I found solidarity with others who understood the complex emotions of leaving an abusive situation. It wasn't just Margaret who was abusive, I realized during one session. Jake's passive, enabling his gaslighting, his financial deception. Those were forms of abuse too. The group nodded in understanding. There was no judgment, only support. As I worked through my anger, grief, and eventually forgiveness. Not for their sake, but for my own. Surprisingly, Harold Hartwell remained in my life. After his testimony helped secure the case against Margaret, he occasionally stopped by the cafe for coffee. He never mentioned Jake or Margaret unless I brought them up, respecting the boundaries I had established. "You know," he said one afternoon over cappuccino, "I should have done what you did years ago. Stood up to Margaret, protected what was important to me. My son might have turned out differently if I had." I learned from Harold that Jake had finally moved out of his mother's influence, taking a job in another state. Margaret, her social standing damaged beyond repair, had sold her mansion and relocated to Florida. Susan apparently followed shortly after, still orbiting Margaret's diminished star. As for me, I gradually rebuilt my life on my own terms. The cafe prospered. I made new friends who knew nothing of my past. I even began dating again, cautiously at first, then with increasing confidence as I learned to trust my own judgment. The house evolved along with me. I painted the living room a vibrant blue that my grandmother would have loved. I planted new flowers in the garden, creating a riot of colour visible from the cafe windows. Every change made the space more mine, washing away the lingering shadows of the past. On the second anniversary of my divorce, I hosted a small gathering at the cafe. Just Amy, a few close friends, and Harold. As we toasted with champagne, Amy raised her glass. "To Lydia, who taught us all what courage looks like." I smiled, touching the faint scar on my cheek that now felt like a badge of honour rather than a mark of victimhood. "To standing our ground," I replied, "and to the homes we build for ourselves, not just the physical spaces, but the lives we choose to create." Later, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on the porch swing my grandfather had built, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The weight of Margaret's cruelty and Jake's betrayal had finally lifted, replaced by a hard-won peace. The journey from that terrible lunch to this moment of serenity had been long and painful, but necessary. I had learned that sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones who cause the most harm. I had discovered that standing up for yourself might make you enemies, but it also reveals your true friends. Most importantly, I had found that strength often emerges from our most vulnerable moments, if we are brave enough to embrace it. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I made a silent promise to my grandmother. Her gift, this house, had become more than just a building. It was a symbol of resilience, a sanctuary rebuilt from the ashes of betrayal. I would honour that gift by living fully, loving wisely, and never again allowing anyone to diminish my worth. If you've ever had to stand your ground against those who should have loved you most, I hope my story reminds you that you're not alone. Have you ever had to make a difficult choice between keeping the peace and keeping your dignity? I'd love to hear your experiences in the comments below. Please like and subscribe if this story resonated with you, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, true strength often comes after our hardest battles.